Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers discuss veteran issues, science, geopolitics, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
Good to see you, Pierce.
Good to see you too. So today we're going to be talking about opioid addiction. This will be episode 10, lucky number 10. Cool. But first, let's cover some good news. In a world dominated by sensational doom and gloom news, we felt it'd be nice to start each show off covering a good news story and sharing our thoughts. So, with that, what have you got for us, Richard?
All right, I have a news story here from Science Daily, and the headline is Myelination in the Brain May Be Key to Learning Opioid Addiction. So, myelination is a process of our nervous systems where a fatty coating grows around our neurological and nervous system tissue. And what it does is it acts as an insulator to make those signals stronger and with less noise. It works the same exact way as an insulator would work on any other type of conductor or signal transmission wire. So this is a naturally occurring process of our brains and our nervous system. In fact, this article gets it a little bit into talking about how our brains develop. So, scientists have found that the process of adaptive myelination, which helps the brain learn new skills, can also promote addiction to opioids. Our brains, even in adulthood, continually adapt to what we do, strengthening or weakening neural pathways as we practice new skills or abandon old habits. Now, research by Stanford medicine scientists has found that a particular type of neuroplasticity, known as adaptive myelination, can also contribute to drug addiction. In adaptive myelination, more active brain circuits gain more myelin, the fatty insulation that allows electrical signals to transfer faster and more efficiently through nerve fibers. Learning to juggle or practice the piano, for example, gradually increases myelination in the brain circuits involved, optimizing for those abilities. But the same adaptive myelination that is essential to learning attention and memory has a dark side. In the new study, in mice, researchers found that a single dose of morphine was enough to trigger these steps, leading to myelination of dopamine-producing neurons, part of the brain's reward circuitry. This spurred the mice to seek out more of the drug. When the myelination was blocked, the mice made no effort to find more of the morphine. So this is, of course, really important because it gives us one more understanding of the reward system pathways that are co-opted in an addictive process. And it helps us to move maybe farther and farther away from the idea that addictions are moral failings or that they are some other volitional kind of behavior, because addictions are simply what our brains do already. It's just that the nervous system is building a fortress around the connections that drug or behavior made, that drug or behavior was a solution to something. So, people started doing it for whatever reason, and now our brain gets the signal that that's an important behavior and begins insulating it. And so these researchers work on the mice. If they block that process, if the new myelination didn't form, then the circuits really didn't get established and their addiction didn't really kick into gear.
That's super fascinating because it makes you wonder. It's like, well, could you, beyond doing the activity itself, if you wanted to trick your brain into basically getting addicted to a habit, a good thing, like let's say you're like, oh, I really want to learn the piano, I guess, as you could say, is that if there would be a way of stimulating that even further so that the pathway would happen. So you just be like, oh, wow, suddenly I want to keep playing this more and more because I'm getting that reward system. Or I wonder if it would just be worked better at blocking the myelination from happening when it comes to negative addictive behavior. It's interesting because addiction at the end of the day is it's a bad habit, and it's bad because you're probably overdoing it more than you needed to be doing it to maintain a balance within your lifestyle, right? I mean, that at the end of the day, that's why addiction is negative, is because of that, not necessarily the repetition of doing a thing.
or because it's physically hazardous to your health, or because it's causing relational damage within your family system.
Absolutely.
So it has these negative consequences because, as we've talked about in the past, the behaviors replace what would ideally be a um, a relational structure that provided co-regulation between the individuals participating in the relational structure.
Absolutely.
And these don't have to be families necessarily, but generally speaking, that's where this would come from. It's where our first relationships are formed,
Yeah.
and it's becoming more and more understood that those early relationships, if those are compromised in some way, that they result in people having addictions.
Yeah, and opioid addictions are a specific sinister addiction as well because they're they can degrade the health quite rapidly comparatively to other
Yeah.
addictions that kind of can take a longer cumbersome route to really start to negatively affect you. You know, you can a lot of people can drink alcohol for quite some time before they start to experience liver damage and
Mm-hmm.
you know, a lot of the health complications that would come from something like that versus something like an opioid addiction, especially we've seen with the legal heroin that's been out. Basically, every
Mm-hmm.
oxycodone isotope of that drug essentially has, you know, and then fentanyl now, which is another opioid, a really powerful opioid. Um, yeah, these have really ravaged much of our country recently. So
And there was specific uh, sinister application of uh, commission by omission and outright lies, and just the structure behind the development of those pharmaceuticals to deny that they were addictive, to deny that they would have properties that would get people hooked on them.
well, in the promotion of the pharmaceutical sales,
Mm-hmm.
reps who were selling to these doctors who were setting
Mm-hmm.
up basically prescription clinics to just, you know,
Yep.
a door where people could come in and get a prescription very easily. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone was making quite a bit of money from this, including all the way up to the
Yep.
pharmaceutical company. I'm pretty sure uh, what the Sattler family or um, they were the ones who were being sued. Um, for their oxycodone or Percocet or some one of those. But yeah, there was all the way up. There was quite a bit of corruption around pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, it's contributed to the general mistrust of the American population of medicine, pharmaceuticals, the companies and organizations that deliver these products for good reason. But it never had to be this way. It was this way because someone got greedy. Someone saw a route to making a ridiculous amount of money and threw out their talk about a moral failing. They tossed out their ethics to do this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and what's terrible is the opioid epidemic really pre- it preceded the pandemic by a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a huge blow to trust within the pharmaceutical companies, and then they need that trust when they're
Yeah.
developing new vaccine technology at a rapid rate, faster than they've ever done before. You know,
Mm-hmm.
really a feat of scientific science, really
Yeah.
completely marred by the actions and the greed of their
Yeah.
past. It's a moral lesson right there for corporations watching something bite you in the ass so wholeheartedly to the point where we have, you know, a large swath of the population who would rather take vaccine information from, you know, Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and other characters who have no business talking about the vaccine, you
Mm-hmm.
know. um, so yeah, I would say the follow-on effects of the opioid epidemic, we could see a lot of those. We're still feeling the reverberations of that to the point where when my wife was recovering from a C-section on her second pregnancy, they barely gave her any. I mean, God, getting just a couple pain pills from these people is so hard.
Yeah.
I was under surgery for 4 hours for my nose when I was getting it rebroken. and fixed from long COVID, by the way, having my sinuses
Right.
torn out. Um, and they barely, I mean, I think they gave me like five strong, the super strong ibuprofens, right? The 800 milligram. I mean, that's what they gave me. I was like, that should
Hmm.
do, right? And I was like, I was under the knife for you know, for 4 hours. When I was in the army back in the day, that we used to get, a huge bottle of Percocets and all the kind of, yeah. So they stopped that, and they've really gone the opposite way where they're just really, the hospitals have become super, um, tight gripped on any of the pain medications now, just across the board. At least that's what we've noticed in the last couple of years. So that's been a follow-on effect of um, the mistrust in the opioid
Yeah.
epidemic of the pharmaceuticals.
I absolutely, uh, from a historical narrative, appreciate that those major medical complications that I had in 2018, they took place before the pandemic.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
but for the grace of God, right?
I remember that time pretty well, because Sarah was 8 months pregnant with our around the time we found out that there was that when we were getting word that there was to be a pandemic. um Sarah was about 6 or 7 months pregnant. It was November when we got word from
Hmm.
our friends in Australia. And my wife, she has really good friends to have in Australia when there's a pandemic about to come out. Her really good school friend married this one of the PhDs who worked on the malaria vaccine for like 20 years in
Hmm.
Africa, like super well renowned biologist. And they got word in like November, and she was like, there might be a major pandemic, like something's coming out of the China area. And this was way back when. Um,
Hmm.
and then around January, remember, we started to hear the whispers quite loudly. Reddit was talking about it in November and December once you started looking for it. And then my wife was very pregnant in January. And we were just like, oh God, I hope she can have this baby before, stuff happens. I remember
Hmm.
I was showing up to school like January 20th, and I had a mask already. And I think one of my professors was laughing. He was all like, oh, you think this is going to be that big of a deal? I was like, it's going to be a pandemic. Everyone was looking at me like I was crazy at the time. But I was like, during a pandemic with an unknown disease, the people who always die first are babies and old people. Just like generally, these are the people who die first, and people who undergo who just had a baby. Also, my wife, not to mention if she had an emergency C-section, all of those things added to this state of vulnerability and us just not knowing what was coming out. By the time February and then March, the lockdowns happened, I mean, we were the crazy people spraying our freaking bags at first and wiping down our stuff for
Hmm.
the first couple months because we just didn't know what we were
Hmm.
dealing with. And it was just better to err on the side of caution. I think people forget that about the pandemic. Is at the time, we didn't know what the fuck was coming out.
Understatement
And
of the year.
yeah, then 2 years later, everyone's like, I can't believe we locked us down. I can't believe we did all these dumb
Yeah.
things or whatever. And it was like, yeah, but you didn't know it was not, it was just a pretty nasty cold at the time, like that could kill and still killed quite a few old people, by the way, and people with comorbidities. So, um, yeah, anyways, my pandemic remembrances.
It's going to be a very interesting section of people's history books in 50 years. When they try to parse all the things that took place in a 36-month period.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember about 10 months into it, we also had the fires on the West Coast that were really brutal. Uh, California was getting all the news because over 100 people had been killed due to wildfires,
Hmm.
which was just an incredible large number of people. If you've been down here in the Bay Area with the wind, you could see why
Yep.
and how that happened so quickly, how a fire could travel at 60, 70 miles an hour easily down here. Um, But Oregon and Washington are only separated by imaginary lines that we've made on maps. And so
Mm-hmm.
that fire happens all along the West Coast. It wasn't just in California. It's just there's so many people in California that it takes kind of the oxygen out of the room. But me and my wife had to evacuate our place because we were in a yellow evacuation zone during the fire season in August. And it was 10 months
Mm-hmm.
into the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and there were fires on the coast in Tillamook area. So we tried to get Airbnb. We kept trying to get Airbnbs and they kept canceling on the coast because we couldn't find anything in Portland. We couldn't find anything south because that's where all the fires were, and to the east where
Right.
the fires were. So really the west was it. But then we found out the guy who kept canceling on us, I finally messaged him. I'm like, it says you take dogs. Is it because I have the dogs? And he's like, Tillamook's on fire. You can't come here.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit. So now we have a disaster on three sides of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really terrifying feeling. All of a sudden I was like, oh shit, I haven't felt this way where like, a tornado or a hurricane's coming in and where were they to go? So we ended up having to go to Washington, like Western Washington, north for a while up into the casino and stayed there for a week with a
Mm-hmm.
10-month-old. My wife's still recovering from the C-section, and there was smoke in all the states. Washington was still smoky, but yeah, that was quite a terrifying time, and that was during the pandemic as well. Thankfully, it was over summer and just happened to be between uh, summer term and fall term of my senior year. So I lucked out timing wise right there. In fact, I was very lucky for both of those. Having the kid right before the shutdowns was very lucky, just like you
Mm-hmm.
undergoing your cancer treatments before the lockdowns was pretty lucky timing as far as with all things considered.
I went out to Astoria when when the city I live in was being threatened by fire. Even though the fire would have to cross a substantial river, we, the way that winds blew and the way that fires jump water, it was a probability that we were going to have a fire right in town. So I loaded up a bunch of things and went out to Astoria and stayed in a bed and breakfast out there for 3 days. You know, really wasn't expected to go on a vacation during that year.
Yeah, we stayed in the hotel room like basically the whole time because the casino was kind of locked down still because of the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. Because there were people there, there's tons of people there gambling, uh, and I went the last day. I think we were getting ready to leave, and I took like $40 with me. Made $180 at the blackjack table. By the way, casinos suck these days now. By the way, there's like one blackjack table and just a shit ton of machines everywhere. If I
Yeah.
ever have to hear baby boomers talk about millennials or Zoomers playing video games, they can kiss my ass because I saw all the baby boomers there sitting there playing the most basic video game I've ever seen in my life, where they push one button over and over again, and then the lights and and I'm just like, who are you guys to talk? Like, this is so boring. But anyways, I made like $180 at the blackjack table, real quick. Got in, got out. That's the way I either win fast or lose fast and get out. But
Yeah.
that was a kind of a fun little bonus. Came back and threw some cash on the bed when we were checking out. I was like, I just want some money. We got to gamble at the casino real quick and then bounced out. So luckily, that was never an addiction that really took hold of me compared to the rest of them. Thankfully, I didn't get that one. That one's an easy life ruiner. I
Yeah.
have to say that's a malicious one.
It
One of
it
the
definitely has ruined people's livelihoods, lives, families, and just everything about their existence just crumbles when they have that gambling addiction.
Yeah, it's a brutal one. It's yeah, it's really popular these days online, like sports gambling and all that stuff. I see these
Hmm.
advertisements and applications for it all the time, everywhere. It's super popular. I wonder if it's actually growing within the country in popularity. I mean, I'm sure it is, but or if it's more like the same people who like to gamble are using just more apps and stuff because it's available to them and stuff. I wonder about these things because I just can't imagine um, a large portion of the population that's got a healthy sense of things adopting gambling. It might be a sign of wealth inequality that gambling has become so popular as well. I don't know.
Yeah, like we needed one more symptom of that.
Yeah, it's one of those. We need one more. Yeah, well, there's a bunch of that. I did just watch a video on there that was saying what Americans perceive our economy to be versus what it actually looks like.
Hmm.
It was needless to say, the top 1% owning quite like 50% of the wealth in America,
Yeah.
while the bottom 80% own like 0.5% of the wealth in America. It's something ridiculous. I'm part of that, but we're both part of that bottom 80% though. So
Oh, yes.
same team. Uh, Down here in California with $3,600 a month rent, by the way, in case you guys were wondering. If you can be in the Bay Area, and I'm not living in a great apartment, by the way. There's a reason why this area is very this is the nicest little area in my apartment, in our 2 bedroom apartment. But yeah, $3,600 a month for rent, um, for a 2 bedroom. I could get a house up in Portland right now still, with that mortgage, easy,
Yeah.
not a problem. And Portland's got one of the most overpriced housing markets in the country right now, by far,
Yep.
easily. Uh, I hope it levelizes. I don't know if that's going to happen though. I hope it levelizes after you sell your house, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not moving
Well,
out
there
right away, so
one of one of the variables in the trend. There's multiple variables. There's never just one thing. One of the variables in the trend of housing prices has been the supply of housing is lower than it would be had there not been a financial crisis in 2008, which essentially stopped most new home building for it was almost a decade. And the loans that people could get on for housing and so forth, there's all these qualities about the 2008 market crash that just messed it up. But that's only one of the variables. The other one of the variables is that, the largest American generation that's ever existed is still alive. They still own their homes. They
multiple homes,
there's
some of quite a
there's
few of them.
yep, they're still there. They have rental properties that they lease, and that generation, when they go away, it's going to create an adjustment. I don't know what it's going to look like specifically, but when the baby boomers are called to serve their Lord in heaven, it's going to change the housing market for sure. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that there'll be more supply though, because the supply of houses that are owned by that generation aren't necessarily what people want to own. So it could disrupt it in some novel way that we just haven't seen yet.
Well, and a couple things need to happen too, because since the 2008 financial crisis, in 2010, Obama passed legislation, or the Congress and Obama
Mm-hmm.
approved legislation to allow companies like BlackRock, Blackstone, and Berkshire Hathaway.
Yep.
That's Warren Buffett, if you didn't know, Larry Fink, if you didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
and I forget Blackstone's CEO, but he's a friend of Larry Fink. You can look him up. These companies were allowed to purchase single family homes and have been ever since then.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to know where roughly 27% of the market was getting gobbled up to now, like 53%, up as much as 70%, depending on the states. Um, if you've ever tried to buy a house in the last 5 to 7 years and you're like, wow, I just keep getting outbid at the last minute, a cash buyer comes in and pays $50,000 to $100,000 over.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was Zillow, by the way, during the pandemic. They were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So all of these entities got to, and this at the time, uh, the legislation made sense to stimulate the economy in 2010, because 2010 was a really bad year for America. It was probably the
Yep.
dippest. The crash started happening in 2007. We maybe identified it in 2008. We really started to feel it in 2009. More companies went under in 2009, and 10 actually than did in 2008.
Yeah.
So by 2010, the legislation made sense. It should have been temporary. It
Mm-hmm.
never should have been a permanent, and it definitely should be undone now. I know that the Biden administration is talked about restricting this. Um, so if there's ever another reason to vote for not a criminal, if that's where we've come down to, then that might be one if you would like to buy houses, because I can guarantee you the criminal will not lower anything that has to do with a single family buying their own house. I can tell you that. In fact, I felt the effects of his tax cut this year, having to spend an extra $2,000 in my taxes because some of our what is it called when you can write somebody off, or dependent.
Dependents.
What's that? So they changed the dependent structure. So the structure of the tax cuts that Trump and the Republican ran Congress passed in 2017, they had a really good conditions set that were permanent for corporations. It was corporate tax cut, permanent. Ours was a temporary tax credit that went away, and then eventually we would get taxed more by the end of the 10 years of this tax
Yeah.
cut. And I started to feel it. I think it's year 7 now of that silly cut. So yeah, not to get too political here, but I've felt the effects of one president, and I've actually felt the financial effects of a different president now with Mr. Joseph Biden. So I get to test them both out. I'll say one is winning by quite a bit.
Lest our entire discussion become just this.
Yeah.
I,
Yes, I mean it would be easy to go down the political rabbit hole, but we don't need to for now.
Plenty of pundits talking about it.
There's plenty. They'll all be speculating on this forever. I'm not. I've stopped speculating on who's going to win the election after 2016. And I did start in 2019 again. Realized all that speculation really didn't matter at all.
Yeah.
And now I can healthily speculate with my wife, and we don't lose any sleep about it. At this point, we know who we're going to vote for, and I feel pretty confident about the outcome of this election, but who knows? I was right in 2020. I was right in 2016. We'll see if I can get this one right. There's that historian who's right every time since like the 70s. I forget what his name is, but he's pretty cool dude to listen to. I like he's got a whole metric for how he predicts. He did predict Biden in 2020. He predicted Trump in 2016. He's predicted everybody since 2070. And sounds like he's predicting, he's saying basically a shit ton of shit has to go wrong for Biden from now to then for him to lose. Mainly if he died, I think that would probably be the one. That would be the one that would go wrong. Most go wrong, I'd say. So please don't do that.
May he have all the health he needs.
Yes, may he tap into the fountain of youth that my grandma is exhibiting, and she's her 96-year-old, but she's figured out how to live a lot longer. So hopefully he's taking notes.
It's fried eggs, bacon, the cigars, and whiskey every day, right? That's yeah, Cuban cigars, whiskey, and bacon.
People live on that forever sometimes. I don't know if, they're just like what that is. That I will say, some of those people that live the longest time, they're like, "What's your secret?" Well, I drink a glass of wine every day, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, what? That wasn't it. But maybe the idea is that all of these different things help them maintain a healthy state of being, which is really what you need to live longer, especially if cancer might be the physical product of an unhealthy state of being, as far as mental state as well. So there might be something to that. I don't know. I don't know if I want to live an extra 10 years longer if I can't eat bacon every once in a while. That just seems like is that extra 10 years worth it? If like I went 70 years without bacon, I get to live to 80. Is it really depends. I have kids now, so they would say, yeah, it was worth it, Dad. But you never know. So bacon's pretty good.
Well, we can't endorse it as a age longevity nutritional supplement. It just so happens that there are people who have lived very long and consumed it as well.
Yeah. So when it comes to addiction, I'm wondering, how do you tool that person out? How do you tool your brain in a way that will be that you'll find the healthy balance of habits versus making it an addiction? I wonder if that is like, I'm sure this is a question that gets asked all the time, but I'm curious about this.
There's an idea that I was listening to something this morning that the person being interviewed brought this up, and I've heard it a couple of times in the past, but it's top of mind for me today, and that is, you can ask people what their noble cause is. What is your noble cause? And it could be pretty abstract or it could be pretty concrete, but this noble cause is a organizing feature around which your life revolves. And so maybe your noble cause is something to do with the way that you assemble family and friends throughout the year, the way that comes together because of your sustained connections with these people. Maybe your noble cause is some type of self-care regimen that if you apply the actual definition of self-care, that it turns into a lifestyle pattern that's ultimately it's biased towards human health. Noble cause can be about something you're doing that is generous and altruistic because you're rescuing orphans or pets or something else.
So is another way is like finding your purpose, basically. Like
Yep.
Finding your purpose. Yes. Yeah, we've talked about this before.
Yeah. And
Yeah, go ahead.
I was on jury duty last year, and this was a grand jury, so we weren't in the courtroom hearing we weren't in the courtroom hearing the attorneys do their battle like you would see on TV. We were in a small conference room, and we would hear testimony from witnesses and from defendants or not the defendants. Who am I thinking of? The plaintiffs, because what they were establishing was whether or not the case could go to court. And so that's the background here. So I'm in the room with 5 other people, and one of the other jurors was willing to be forthright and talk about her past, her addiction, how that had made up a major part of her early and middle life, and then when that changed. And if if you're with me in a situation like that, I'm gonna be interrogating, like, tell me about this. I want to know what caused you to get it. What was the feature of why you made this major life change? And for her noble cause was custody of her kids because she had lost it. And I think that it's not the only variable. These are always multivariate things. But I think that when you look at what a noble cause can be and can mean to a person, then it can be the foundational motivation to change something about your life. And the reality is that when she stopped her addiction, stopped the addictive process, when she got sober, as they say, she was able to reclaim these parts of her life that had been taken from her. Not just her kids, but like relationships that were healthy and allowed for a family system to flourish. And some relationships went away entirely because they were the ones that created the environment to make an addiction flourish. So this is just one example of an answer to your question. It's kind of not the only thing, and it can't really happen in a vacuum, but it's a centerpiece of it.
Yeah, I knew it would be a good talking point because I was wondering because when I think about this, a couple things come to mind. I think about when I was doing a lot of harmful things to myself. In a way, I feel like you're subconsciously degrading yourself
Mm-hmm.
so that you feel the way you perceive the way you should feel, which
Yeah.
should be less than great. Like you weirdly want to feel like shit. Maybe something along living in your own sorrow, your own sadness, something about that,
Mm-hmm.
I think is appealing to a portion of the population that experiences a lot of addictions at some points. Um, so that your own perception fits the perception you think about how you should be treated, I guess. And that's an interesting thought. And the way you get out of that is through networking. Like the interesting part of that story is that she realized that um, just valuing herself might not get her to have
Right.
that noble cause, or but the idea that her kids would draw her to care enough to maybe
Yeah.
change her behavior, I think is the big key there. It goes back to my conversation about contracts, I think, when we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
contracts and setting contracts with yourself. People who are addicted are terrible at setting contracts with themselves and terrible at keeping promises to yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the keys, I think, for a lot of people who are addicted is they tend to be better at keeping promises to other people, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, and they'll still keep those up more than their own contracts with themselves. They'll their promises with themselves they'll renege on first, and I did plenty of times when I would try to quit tobacco, and try to quit video games. Not so much when I tried to quit alcohol. That was pretty easy for me. There were other addictions
Mm-hmm.
that were easier for me to quit. So everyone's got
Mm-hmm.
their own flavor of challenges. But and I think what you're trying to do when you're finding your noble cause is you're trying to rewire your brains in a way that you can start by keeping contracts with other people that maybe you didn't keep before. When I say people
Mm-hmm.
are better at keeping contracts with other people than themselves, that doesn't mean they're good contracts they're keeping with other people. They'll renege on plenty of
Right.
those. It's just that they keep so few contracts with yourself. Besides, I need to do my addictions, right? Those contracts are rocks. Those are the most solid of the contracts you set with yourself. Um, However, I'm just saying perspective wise, relative to your own contracts with yourself, they keep better contracts with other people generally. But that doesn't mean they're good. And one of the things about having this noble purpose that you speak to, it's about it's about practice. It's about practicing setting contracts. I imagine the environments of heavily traumatized people, they're coming from a place where
Mm-hmm.
contracts haven't been well kept to them. Obviously, they're
Right.
something along the upbringing structure. The contracts really went awry. The promises made by adults for how you should have been upbrought um, were not withheld very well. Maybe the parents thought they were keeping good contracts, but they weren't. Um, and so to come from that environment, you've got years and years of breaking promises to yourself, watching promises be broken to themselves, watching promises be broken to yourself, to other people. These are all just
Mm-hmm.
conditioning environments that are teaching your brain, wiring your brain a certain way, and it takes quite a bit of time to undo all of that learning. And you have to learn to first, I think, do what you're better at, which is why saying contracts with other people is easier. So you double down on that and go, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to, these are people I care about. I'm going to make more and more promises to them. And it's a very incremental process in some ways. And eventually you get to tool that to making promises for yourself. And you'll slowly get better at creating these contracts, I think, over time. It's definitely a learned skill.
It's one of the strengths of the 12-step process.
Yes.
Which is AA, and part of the reason why it has proven to work as well as it has is built around the social nature of it. It's built around the details that you're describing as keeping a social contract between individuals and the group. And so there's a lot to be said for that. There's the other part of, okay, so I talked about alienation of pathways that are consequential to addiction at the beginning of our discussion today. And the same is true for the way that your nervous system negotiates relationships and how it perceives the environment around it. And if what's laid down for it and what's established and sustained gets alienated, it gets baked into the neurologic picture. And so that becomes the default route for a person to behave within. And changing that is non-trivial when you consider that you've literally created biological material around sustaining a behavior pattern. And the part of this I was sort of revolving around in my mind as I was thinking about the AA, the utility of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that, well, if you think about it, of course, we're social animals. We're social creatures. Maybe it's patently obvious that if we do confront a scenario where we can form these contracts with others that are trusted, sustained, and respected, then if we're not too far gone the other way, if we don't have so much biological matter built around the unhealthy existence that we were living in, then that's what brings us back, is the drive and desire to connect with others of our species that are safe and healthy.
Yeah, and I think another feather to AA's cap is the fact that I think what adds a lot of power to it is that the program is ran by alcoholics. The sponsors are all they have had an addiction to substances or had addiction to things that allow them, that give them credibility. They've overcome those things. And so having someone like that, being able to create a contract with someone like that who's gone through something that the person who is going through the program can relate to, I think that adds a lot of weight to it too. It's like, okay, well, this person, they're 15 years sober, they did it. And now I have a contract with them. I don't want to let them down if they were able to do it. And so that lends to that strength and security. So there's definitely, I can see why the AA program has a lot of really cool features about it. I do know that they get a little heavy on the religious undertones and stuff in there, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but for some people, I'm sure that helps as well. But yeah, no, AA has definitely got some structures that make a lot of sense, especially in terms of creating contracts with people. And it's, like you said, it's a social network aimed at self-improvement or self-betterment. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I would touch back onto the news story that we started the conversation with and talk about this part that I never get tired of bringing up when we talk about human development and growth. Myelin development does not complete until we're in our late 20s or early 30s, which is kind of fascinating, said Michelle Mignot, PhD, MD at the Milan Gabher professor in pediatric neuro-oncology. Well, that's a mouthful. I don't even know why I tried it. So she's a senior author of the study. Even after such a protracted developmental period, special cells in the brain called oligodendrocytes continue to generate new myelin in some brain regions. Boy, talk about a spelling bee word. What we've come to understand is over the last decade or so is that myelin in some parts of the nervous system is actually plastic and adaptable to the experience. The activity of the neuron can regulate the extent to which the axon is myelinated. So Outside of my level of knowledge to really explain the difference between an axon and a neuron, but they are the parts of the brain that experience connection, or that experience growth and connection. We're talking about neurogenesis and brain health and so forth. We're talking about behaviors and what those connections mean in the brain. We're talking about these structures, these parts of the
Isn't the
nervous
axon
system.
the end of the nerve, like the part that can connect? If I'm remembering, I'm thinking of like three fingers or fingery phalanges is
Yep.
the axon. But I'm, like you said, I'm way out of my cellular depth and depth for that matter. Here. There's a reason I became an engineer and not a biologist. It's that pronunciation I can't get right. Yeah.
Totally. So research in neuroplasticity has mostly focused on changes that occur at synapses where neurons meet and communicate with each other. Adaptive myelination adds a new layer to how our brains learn from experience. Much of the foundational knowledge about adaptive myelination has come from Monnier. Monnier, that's how you pronounce this name. Okay, Monnier. Hey, barely past 12th grade. College doesn't really cause us to read out loud and have to pronounce these words that are just simple people's names.
Yeah.
Much of the foundational knowledge about adaptive myelination comes from Monnier's lab. In 2014, her team reported that stimulating the premotor cortex of mice increased the myelination of neurons and improved limb movement. Subsequent studies by her lab and collaborators have found that mice need adaptive myelination for spatial learning, to navigate a maze, for example, or to remember a threatening situation. So I thought that bunch of paragraphs with totally impronounceable words would lend a little bit of credibility to what we've been saying about this, which is the brain is not done adding neurobiological material after the age of 25. It's just that it's most active prior to the age of 25, where this neurologic material is growing and then being pruned away and then being myelinated and then sort of establishing the connections that make us better able to make long-term decisions, or to make decisions where it puts our pleasure-seeking apparatus as a secondary or a tertiary priority, and it puts other priorities ahead of that. So this is why they tell you to dance. This is why they tell you to do puzzles. This is why they tell you to do these things that are a challenge to your brain's to its ability to reason through tasks or challenges, or to put together motions that are a choreography or something like that.
Yeah.
Because this is ideally what's happening. It's generating nervous system tissue. You're growing biological material. It's coding those pathways with myelination so that they work really well. They have more signal strength, as we would say in electrical engineering. And this very likely is one of the modalities to get into your 90s and still have your wits about you.
Yeah,
And,
I think
maybe put off some of those degenerative diseases.
Yeah, absolutely. Of which they're finally breaking some ground on. I think another thing it's training your pleasure, we've talked about this, but your dopamine release to kind of work in tandem with a proper reward system, right? If this is a healthy system that's developed, then you're not stopping pleasure seeking from doing activities. You're just regulating it better, and you can and the dopamine will get released later, right? Sometimes things have a longer payoff, we've talked about before, and especially with incremental change. One thing, I came up with a new analogy, which was essentially like, imagine you're building a structure and you need to create a foundation first, would be like the phase one, and then phase two, framing the house, and then doing the final touches to the house. We have like 3 phases to the structure, whatever house structure. The foundation, there's the poor day where you pour the cement. And that's when people would think that the foundation is happening. But there's a lot of preamble that comes before you create that foundation. You're creating a form, boards on either side of whatever foundation you're to pour. You might be excavating the land and levelizing it for the pour. There might be a basement or a couple floors underneath it that need to go. You have to set rebar and other composite material that goes within the concrete. Maybe there's space for wiring and other different clever things. All of this happens. It could be months, half a year, depending on the size of the structure, to a year where we're making the base, where we're making the foundation, and not anything has actually happened as far as the structure, the final structure happening until you pour that concrete. The pour day, and then you take all that, all the outside casing away after a couple days or a week or whatever. Suddenly you see the foundation. It's like, wow, look, all that work has been done, and it was really quick. It seems quick overnight, but that's a lot what incremental change feels like. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the before you get the payoff, you know, and they're like, oh, look, we got the foundation up, and then there'll be a momentum to something, right? The structure, building the structure, framing the structure on top of the foundation is quite quick usually. So you'll see a huge burst of activity, and suddenly a building's up, and then it'll sit around not being painted or sided for a couple of months, maybe even a year. No roof is put on, so on and so forth. Right. We're not seeing the permitting process. We're not seeing the inspections. We're not seeing the wiring happening, the plumbing happening, but all of that is happening behind that framing. And this is kind of the example I like to think of now of when it comes to incremental change. Like, there's these periods where you don't see a lot moving on the superficial level, but things are happening, and sometimes change feels that way. You know, it's not as flashy as sudden change might feel when it comes to making these fixes within your life, at least.
I'm not going to be able to really describe in detail the dopaminergic process that our brains have, but I will say that in order for, so dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters that is involved in our novelty seeking. It's like, you get a release not because you necessarily ate the handful of M&Ms, but because you found the handful of M&Ms. It has a lot more to do with the motivation around going after things. And so, you know, the dopaminergic system in our brains has to be able to handle a range which is probably greater than almost any other organism on the planet, because we have, you know, eating a celery stick that we went to the refrigerator and pulled out and ate. That's going to be pretty low on your dopamine escalation ladder. And then we have things that, you know, we don't get into too many prurient topics here, but orgasm, like, that's going to be among the higher end things that we could experience. Yeah. And it has to be able to traverse that range, you know, in 24-hour periods. And what can happen to us is that we can get on a terminology I've heard several times, the dopamine treadmill, where you know, we can do a couple of things in our life, and next thing you know, that celery stick from the refrigerator it's not hitting it at all. There is no dopaminergic response from that. But this other more extreme behavior or more
those donuts, though, you know, those donuts every day.
You could eat donuts every single day, and you know what they would do? They would become the same as a celery stick. Yes. They would totally lose their intense dopamine hit. You know,
that's why
I finally had
donuts, different donuts. No.
I had ice cream after going years without eating ice cream the other day. It was like, oh my God, where has this been my whole life? Yeah, I had a vanilla ice cream. It's like...
it wasn't even pistachio? Oh my gosh.
No, it wasn't even Neapolitan. It was just good old vanilla bean ice cream. But the story behind that is that I had been retuning the treadmill that I had been on to drop it down from needing those really big hits more often to now where, you know, celery stick sounds kind of good. I might really splurge and put maybe some peanut butter on a celery stick. Mm-hmm. And that's the idea that sits behind, again, it's one of the variables But that's the idea that sits behind how we get this momentum with a substance that is absolutely stratospheric on that scale that I laid out.
Yeah.
And it obviates climax, and it obviates ice cream, and it obviates donuts, and it just is unbelievably off the charts to our dopaminergic system. And yet, if you do cocaine regularly enough, even it becomes a thing that doesn't satisfy anymore the way that it did the first 19 times that you did it. And so that's the idea of the dopamine treadmill. And that's why things don't last in their efficacy or the utility that we get out of them.
Yeah, that's why, if it's a habit and it's a healthy habit, you do something semi-regularly, you'll still get that dopamine release in a healthy manner. But if you're doing something every day, absolutely, it doesn't work that way. And if you're doing cocaine every day, first off, it's a very expensive habit. Second off, that's a drug that you have to do quite often at night or that day to keep the high going. So it is an expensive habit that you have to do 19 times that night to keep going properly, let alone 19 times that week. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think if there's some takeaways from this conversation that we've had, I would say the big ones are finding the network of safety that you can learn to co-regulate with and create contracts that you'll be more likely to keep until you can practice and be able to keep contracts with yourself better. These all don't have to happen in isolation. This all can happen at the same time. It's not I need to do this, and then I need to do this, and these all can work in concert with each other. And so I think those are the three takeaways I would have from this conversation here, at least, as far as addiction goes.
Develop your noble cause.
Yes.
Develop a noble cause around something that is a contract in and of itself that is hard to break. And that it fits into your value system in some way that you want to sustain, and that it replaces the drive and the urge to do damaging things.
Yeah. Find healthy purpose. Healthy purposes. There can be more than one. You can have more than one noble cause. Noble can be noble to you too. It can be purely, subjective. Yeah, it's unique to the person we're talking to. So I have a bunch of noble causes, things that keep me honest. Between my wife and my kids, and then things I want to do. I think one of the great things is once you get good at setting contracts with yourself on things you shouldn't be doing, because that's kind of the first step. You get better at setting contracts for things you want to accomplish in your life. Like if you want to, per se, write a book and write every day, you need to be able to set contracts with yourself. If you want to go to the gym and be relatively healthy, you need to work out every get on standard schedules. These are all contracts you can set with yourself. You get better at setting the contracts of stuff you don't want to do. You'll get better at setting contracts with yourself that you'll keep of things you do want to do also. So you get more of that healthy dopamine release. So, yeah.
Looks like we're coming up on the hour, and wanted to mention one thing in brief, and maybe it's something that we could expand on later, and that is this idea of reducing friction, or rather putting friction where it would help and reducing it where it would help. Because there are plenty of things that, I could be outside running in this beautiful weather, but I really have too many friction-like things that prevent me from doing all that running or going outside and doing the type of stuff that I think would be a value of mine. So friction, reducing friction towards the direction you want to go, increasing friction in the directions you don't want to go, and that is another one of these abstract ideas where its implementation is a little more, there's a lot more to be said about it. Maybe we could
and unique
touch
to
on
the
that later
individual too as well. I think that's a good that will be a good topic. I'd like to talk about that. So and with that, I just have to say I've enjoyed our conversation. It looks like we're coming to the end of it, so I'm going to say goodbye to you, Richard, and I look forward to our next conversation.
It's great talking with you, Pierce. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.